Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So Kevin Yost is a senior editor at Lucasfilm. He has worked on all sorts of video content, particularly trailers and teasers. He has been working most recently on stuff for The Bad Batch, but he's also done stuff for Season 7 of The Clone Wars and earlier seasons too, Seasons of Resistance, and stuff for Star Wars Celebrations, including stuff for The Mandalorian. But the reason I had reached out to Lucasfilm initially to interview him was because of the Star Wars Rebels Season 3 mid-season trailer. I know that sounds like kind of a deep cut situation now, but that trailer had everything in it. It had Saw Gerrera investigating what's going on Geonosis. It had Admiral Thrawn closing in on the Rebels. It had Sabine returning to Mandalore with the Darksaber. And on top of all of that, it had a stinger at the end with Obi-Wan Kenobi on Tatooine, seeing Maul approaching and him saying, "You're in the wrong place." I still get chills watching that trailer, and the way that he remixed the Obi-Wan Kenobi transmission warning all the Jedi away from Coruscant, the "this is a warning" thing that keeps repeating throughout the trailer. Oh yeah, it's so awesome. So I was really happy to revisit this conversation, and I hope that if you've been listening to the show for a long time, then you may remember it, and if not, then this is going to be hopefully a wonderful new find for you. For this first part of the conversation, I'm going to talk to him about how he got his start at Lucasfilm, the kinds of projects that he generally works on, styles of trailers that he creates, and the process generally of how building a trailer happens at Lucasfilm. So without further ado, here is part one of my conversation with Kevin Yost, senior editor at Lucasfilm. Kevin Yost, thank you for joining me on Star Wars 7x7.
Thanks for having me.
So I gather you've been working with Lucasfilm for more than 10 years. I think you celebrated your 10th anniversary in October, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did, as a matter of fact. It actually seems like it was yesterday. You know, there's so much has gone on in those 10 years. It really sort of flies by, and before you know it, you kind of look at the calendar and you're like, wow, I've been here 10 years.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Do you recall how you got your start?
Yeah. When I first started, there was a group that sort of dealt with the documentaries and the internal pieces here, and they were looking to sort of plus that out and to move more into direct marketing, not technically direct marketing, but get into marketing type things, trailers and things like that. And I had been doing some freelance work in the Bay Area, and my reel had landed on the right person's desk, who was a friend of the person that was starting out this department here. And he said, "Hey, you got to go talk to this guy." And I got brought in one afternoon and was pretty much hired on the spot. So it was pretty much a dream come true.
Wow.
Because at the time, at the time, my wife was working on the Clone Wars. And
okay.
I was doing freelance editorial work, you know, here and there to sort of fill in, and it just so worked out that I got a job here at Lucasfilm as well, and so it was a lot of fun.
That's wonderful. And what was your wife doing on the Clone Wars?
She was a coordinator for the layout. Layout is where they would have the scenes, and the layout artists would have all of the assets, like the assets that represented Obi-Wan or Yoda or Ahsoka, and they'd sort of lay those into the scene, right? And then and into a three-dimensional space, right?
Yep.
And then they would add cameras that they would actually shoot the Clone Wars with. So in essence, you were creating a three-dimensional sort of playground where you could put the cameras and create the camera moves and move the assets, which were the characters or the ships or things like that, around. And so that's how they would essentially shoot the show or pre-shoot the show, and then they would go in and refine that and then animate that and then create the show. So she was involved with the guys that were doing the layout. And there's many layers to that production, and that was just one avenue that she was involved in.
Ultimately, then, I guess your trailer work ended up highlighting some of the work that she was already doing, because you were doing Clone Wars trailers then as well, weren't you?
Right, I was. Just to back up, she wasn't an artist, or she's not an artist. She was like a manager, a production manager, a coordinator, that kind of thing. So
gotcha.
So, but she was very much a fan of Star Wars and that show. So yeah, so as luck would have it, I'm here, and a few months go by, and the Clone Wars movie is about to come out, and so they needed a trailer for that. So I cut a trailer for that, and I think we ended up doing 2 theatrical trailers for that. And then as the show got into development and was airing, they needed trailers to sort of kick off various stages of the show, maybe the season 2 kickoff, and then maybe a certain moment happened in season 2 that they would want to highlight. Maybe it was the Boba Fett moment and sort of things like that. And then it just sort of snowballed from there. Then it was, okay, then we're doing a season 3 trailer for Celebration, and then there would be a mid-season trailer, and sometimes there'd be another trailer that sort of highlighted, well, this character's coming back, and we want to do that kind of thing. So it just sort of built up from there. And then as Rebels was developed, I just sort of moved on into doing that for Rebels.
Got it. So aside from the trailers, are there other types of content that you're helping to develop or create at Lucasfilm?
Yeah, our group is responsible for creating the DVD online extras. We did the Saga Blu-ray set. We did the extras that went on that DVD. We do extras that would happen for Rogue One. So we're sort of wrapping those things up and putting those to bed, and eventually those will come out on the DVD and the Blu-ray. And then there's also things, special reels that we'll cut for Celebration, or maybe there's a licensing need or a PR need that they have something cut. So there's a mixture of external-facing material that we do and internal-only material that we do. So we sort of have our hands in a lot of little different things.
Gotcha. That's awesome. The reason why I initially reached out was about the mid-season trailer for Rebels Season 3 that you did, which, by the way, was absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely. Just very moving and well done. And I think the kudos that have been going around online have been just astounding, and also, I guess, not unexpected. Your work has been very well regarded, I gather, for quite a while, and I'm very pleased to know what's going on behind the scenes in that regard.
Well, thank you.
I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the process, but I guess one thing I wanted to ask you first is, when you're doing trailers, is there a particular style that you have when it comes to trailer creation, or is there a particular Lucasfilm way that things are done? I mean, I know sometimes there are trailers where it's almost like a 3-act structure. There's sometimes where it's trailers where it's more mysterious and you have one character narrating things while you have images and that sort of thing. Do you have a particular go-to, or does Lucasfilm want to see it a certain way?
I don't know if I would say Lucasfilm has a certain way of doing something, but Star Wars at times lends itself to certain ways of presenting the material. And I guess theatrically, if you were cutting a trailer theatrically, I guess there's sort of different needs than if you were to do something for a television show that spans 22 episodes, which is, let's say, roughly 10 hours of material. Mm-hmm. As opposed to a feature film, which is 2 to 2 hours and 45 minutes worth of material that you're trying to promote. So when I'm creating a trailer for the show, for Clone Wars or for Rebels, at the beginning, let's say, I may have 12 episodes to dig into. And those are all in various stages of development. Some are finished, some are just in rough animation, and some are in layout form. So I'll sort of pull from those things. And that's, I guess, 22 episodes. That's roughly 5 some odd hour, or I'm sorry, the 12 episodes that I would start with. I guess you could probably say that's around 5 hours or so of material. So there's a whole big chunk of material to sort of deal with that. So I'm diverging from the style here. So if I could backtrack a bit, depending on the subject matter, if it's a very serious movie, then you would probably have a trailer that sort of leans towards a very serious presentation. So I sort of look at the material and sort of try and figure out, well, what are they trying to say? What is maybe marketing trying to say, and sort of craft it around that. I guess the best example would be with the mid-season trailer. So when we were doing that, we'll meet in a group, and let's say I'll meet with Dave and a couple other people, and we'll sort of go over what's going on in the second half of the season. And he'll come and he'll say, well, these are certain story beats that I really want to cover. And I'll take a look at the material and try and craft the trailer around those bits. And then as I'm watching the material, you'll start pulling. I'll start pulling material that I like and that I want to incorporate into the trailer. And as I'm doing that, I sort of begin to develop an idea of how this is going to come together. Whereas, let's say if the material was a lot of high action, lighthearted material, then that's sort of how I would sort of steer the trailer towards that sort of mood. But let's face it, I mean, the Rebels at this point, I mean, things are not looking too good for them. So I can't really, sort of being true to the material, I can't really paint it as a happy-go-lucky moment. There are those moments where there's comedy and some chuckle moments and some cheering moments that are on the more lighthearted spectrum. But the reality is, they're being hunted. We all sort of know what happens, and now with Rogue One, we know sort of where things tend to go. So I guess with a theatrical trailer, you can come up with sort of a style. And I guess a recent example would be the Logan trailer that just came out yesterday or today. That trailer, you're definitely, things don't look to be very good going on in that universe. And so the music sort of portrays that, and the pace of it sort of portrays that. And so you try and come up with something that's clever, but also pushes the story along. I guess if I could go back to Clone Wars, when I cut a trailer to sort of promote the Boba Fett appearance, I was thinking in terms of spaghetti western. I was trying to think of, the unnamed, man with the poncho on the high plains, and that was sort of like where my brain was. So I was trying to think of music that would work like that, and then as you sort of piece it together, it sort of develops a personality, and a lot of times it's the music that sort of dictates the vibe and the cutting style.
Does that mean that Kevin Kiner provides you with a soundtrack then, or how does that integration work?
Well, sometimes it's Kevin Kiner's music, and sometimes at times it's been Star Wars music. But recently on Rebels, it's been a mixture of Kevin Kiner and library music and composers that I have a relationship with. For the mid-season trailer, it was a mixture of music from a gentleman by the name of David Collins, who might ring a bell. He is a long-time LucasArts person, and he's done voiceover and characters, and he's an accomplished musician. So we had conversations for months trying to get something done and get something moving, and as luck would have it, he was doing something, and we were sort of going back and forth working on a couple cues, and he gave me a cue, and I thought, oh, this would be perfect for Rebels. And so the first half of the trailer is David Collins' music, and the second half is library music that I found. And I could spend 2-3 days looking for music in a music library, pulling upwards of 100 cues, trying to find something that works. Maybe I'll use 20 seconds of one cue, and then maybe I'll use a couple moments from another cue, and then I'll go back to this 20 seconds of a third cue. So it really sort of becomes a collaboration of different cues to sort of create this whole moment.
And this makes you a very multi-talented guy. I don't think I realized that you were, working on music and putting all of that together and essentially, I guess, orchestrating the music for the trailers as well.
I'm not a musician. I can tell a musician, like, hey, can you make it sound like this, or I need a little bit more of this element or that element. But I'm by no means a musician. So I'll leave that to the David Collins and the Kevin Kiners of the world. But there will be moments for going back to last season in Rebels when we did the season finale, and it was dealing with Ahsoka, or the mid-season trailer last year. That was Kevin Kiner's music, and we had been in conversation with him to sort of develop some music and give us something that we could use for that. And he had given us music, and I guess it ended up being incorporated into the show, or it was actually cues that he was already working on for the show, and we ended up using it. And And those are some really fantastic pieces of music. So I've been really fortunate to be able to deal with Kevin Kiner and John Williams and David Collins and a really good library to pull from.
That's excellent. So let me take you back to something that you mentioned about the starting point of a project like this. You said that you met with Dave and some others to talk about what's going on in the season and story beats and so forth. And Dave, in a Star Wars Insider magazine interview, he called this the Empire Strikes Back season of Rebels. So assuming that you're looking at 12 episodes and some of them are finished and others are not, you can only really use content from the ones that are finished, correct?
Yeah, it becomes a combination of that, and if basically when I cut the trailer, I will use anything, and then basically we'll pull it back from there. It's like, well, that shot's not going to be finished, or that moment's not going to be finished, so let's not go there. When I meet with Dave at the beginning, we'll go over some certain moments where he says, there's no way these shots or this episode's going to get finished, but we do have this one shot from this episode that's really good, so you can use that. And then in terms of dialogue is recorded so far in advance that I can use any bit of dialogue from those episodes. I just can't. I don't always have full reign to use shots from episodes. And those are typically the latter episodes. So if it's a trailer that starts off the season, I'll have, again, about 12 episodes that I can pull from, but let's just say that the first 7 are at a point where I know I'll get every single shot from those episodes that I could use. And then from 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, it's sort of a piecemeal bit where I can maybe pull shots from one episode, and maybe I only get 2 shots from a certain episode. So that sometimes comes into play on how I structure things. Because some of those latter episodes are important, but I can't really create a trailer around those. So I sort of have to sort of do a song and dance maneuver around those. And that the great thing about Star Wars and Star Wars fans is that if there are moments in those latter episodes and I only have one shot, and let's just say it's the shot of the hammerhead coming, flying into frame, I can use it because it gets me a lot of mileage out of it, because it's showing this ship that may not have been present in the Star Wars universe, but it helps sort of push the myth of Rebels and whatnot along down the road.
And it has a special weight in particular with the hammerhead now because it was introduced previously in Rebels, and then, of course, it had a very memorable scene in Rogue One as well. So it almost has this cachet. There's an emotional value already connected to it that even if you just show a moment of it, it's enough for you to get that punch.
Right, and it's things like the obvious thing with Thrawn gets me a ton of mileage out of that. But little things where it could even just be something that you're totally familiar with. So when shows like Rebels would pull from Legends and bring it into canon, like the Hammerhead, like Thrawn, it's really nice to sort of throw those in there, even though, granted, Thrawn, we had a big moment with him, but with the Hammerhead, you could just sort of toss it in there really quick, and people will go, aha, I see what's going on there. So those are cool moments to do, especially as a fan, to sort of sprinkle those in there when I can. And some, obviously, we hold close to the chest because we don't want to reveal those until the actual episode airs. So going back to your question, yes, I have a large amount of episodes to pull from, but I don't always have everything in those episodes to pull from. And I can sort of lobby, like, well, can I get this shot taken, sort of sped up through the pipeline, and can we get that shot? So there's a fair amount of shots in the mid-season trailer that are from the latter part of the season that are taken from shows that just have layout and there's not final animation, or they're just getting to the animation point, but they haven't been lit, or there's no color grade done to them. So we sort of try and pick and choose, and we meet and we go, well, this shot is going to be finished, so we can go ahead with that. And then there's easily half a dozen shots in an earlier version of the trailer that weren't going to be ready, so I had to find substitutes for those, or I had to cut around it. Maybe I had to drop a moment and sort of create a different moment and do that. So it's a little bit of give and take and trying to figure out what's going to work. But when I start, I get ideas from Dave. Like the moment where we're starting with Ezra waking up and he's dreaming that he thinks that he's dreaming that he hears Obi-Wan Kenobi. That whole scene was an idea from Dave. Dave said, "Hey, there's this moment where this thing is going on. You could start out the trailer that way." And I'm like, okay, that's great, because it's always sort of tricky to find an in. Like, how are we going to get into this and sort of use something that springboards us into the rest of the trailer? And that was great, because when he was talking about what it was, and I went, oh yeah, he says warning. And then I was thinking in my head, warning, warning. And then it just sort of clicked, like I could make that almost like a klaxon alarm and sort of feather that through the whole trailer. And that's sort of how that came out. And then when he was saying surviving Jedi, that was just a moment where like, okay, of course I'm going to use that echoed out at the very end when I bring in the Obi-Wan moment. So things just sometimes there's this serendipitous moment that you can take advantage of, and there's other moments that you're sort of creating intentionally.
I love what you said about taking that idea of the warning thing and using it as a klaxon, and it almost, again, ties in with Rogue One, and it seems like there's almost a conscious feathering of Rebels in Rogue One as Rebels continues in its timeline and approaches the space of Rogue One. Is there something like that in your brain as well? Are you thinking about how Rogue One touches any of these things at all?
Yeah,
or is it unconscious, as it were?
I do, but I also I have to be careful not to tip my hand too much and keep people interested. So utilizing Saw was important. And I didn't want to dig too much into who he was, because it was also one of those things where I knew it was an early episode for the second half, so we would sort of, it's not something that will carry the whole trailer. But if I can sort of if I could sprinkle these moments of Saw throughout, I can sort of develop the vibe of Rogue One, especially where we see them sort of talking. I can't really say Death Star because they don't know that it's a Death Star, but if I can sort of hint that they're looking at something and they hope that it's not too late and that they're fighting for people not to lose what they already have, those types of things. And that goes a long way into sort of, like you said, feathering into Rogue One. And I guess maybe subconsciously the klaxon sort of came about because of Rogue One. I don't know. It was one of those things where we were sitting there in the meeting, and I was like, oh, I can do this with this. And it just sort of developed, and I said, well, if I echo it out, it can play underneath the thing, and it sort of adds another layer of dread, hopefully, to the whole piece.
It's beautifully done, honestly. It is very well done, and yeah, I absolutely agree with you. The sense of dread in it is palpable, for sure. And when you mentioned the Boba Fett...
That's good, because by the time it gets out there, I've probably looked at it 250 times, and so the impact of it gets lost on me. So to know that whole concept that I had worked, it makes me feel good, because I look at it so often. I kind of think, well, does that even have any impact anymore? Does that even mean anything? So that's good to know.
All right, we're going to pause the conversation right there, and we will pick up with the rest of it tomorrow. For now, though, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the show, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.